My name is Mr. Hellbrook and I've been teaching for more than 15 years. Long enough to know that kids are kids no matter where you go. Noisy, rowdy, and inventive in ways that adults forget how to be. But last fall, I moved north to a smaller district. I found myself in charge of a class where the children weren't like any I taught before. They weren't bad by any stretch, just different, wary perhaps. They could scream their lungs out over dodgeball 1 minute, then fall into eerie silence the next. It was during one of those silences that I noticed their game. At first, I thought it was just a variation on tag or some regional playground chant like, duck duck goose. They formed a loose circle, walking slowly around a chosen child and began chanting. It wasn't a rhyme I recognized, just a cadence of names. All the while, the one in the middle baited, teased, tricked the others into speaking their own name, and whoever slipped became it. That much I could follow. What unsettled me was how serious they treated it. The game always began the same way. Voices hushed, steps measured, a kind of nervous reverence. The playground could be roaring with sound, and still, when that circle formed, the noise dimmed as if some unspoken boundary had dropped around them. And whoever was chosen as it never looked like they were playing. They didn't laugh or roll their eyes or chase after friends. They slumped, shoulders heavy, eyes downcast. More than once I saw tears. I told myself it was just part of the act, a way of making the role less desirable. Kids invent these things, loser rules, penalties, all to add stakes. Still, it left a sour taste in my mouth. Sometimes they tried it on me. "Come on, what's your first name, Mr. Hellbrook?" They'd sing-song, grinning as though they might trick me. Just your first name, just once. But I'd been around long enough to keep that line firm. Teachers who gave away too much too quickly always regretted it, so I'd smile, shake my head, and repeat the rule I'd carried my whole career. "I'm Mr. Hellbrook to you. Nothing more." The attempts never went anywhere. They'd shrug, laugh it off, and return to their circle, whispering among themselves. I might have ignored it altogether if it weren't for what happened that Tuesday. It had been a difficult week already. Gray skies, restless kids, and too much pent-up energy. During recess, I spotted them forming the circle again. This time, the child in the center was Noah, a boy I knew well. He'd been having trouble at home, frequent absences, a father in and out of the picture, a mother working 2 jobs to keep the lights on. I'd spent extra time with him in class, coaxing him into reading out loud, praising every small victory. And now here he was, it. The other kids circled him, voices low and insistent. Noah's head hung, his hands knotted into fists. He wasn't just sulking. I could see it in his face, the pale tightness around his mouth, the tremor in his shoulders. He looked hollow, like someone had scooped out his insides and left him with nothing but fear. My gut clenched. I'd seen plenty of kids pout over losing games. But this wasn't pouting. It was despair. And when I took a step closer, I swore I saw his lips moving, whispering something under his breath, not to the others or to himself, but to something else. It all looked too much. When the bell rang, I caught Noah before he could slip back into the tide of students. He dragged his feet, shoulders slumped, trying to avoid my eye. "Walk with me," I said, steering him toward the bench by the fence. He sat reluctantly, clutching the straps of his backpack like a shield. "You seemed upset out there," I began gently. "The game, it didn't look fun to you." Noah hunched further, eyes fixed on the gravel. "It's just a game." "Doesn't have to be," I said. "If the other kids are giving you trouble, I can step in. No one should have to make you feel like that." That got a flicker. His eyes darted up, then away again. "You don't understand." "Then help me." "I can't fix what I don't know." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he shook his head. "It's not trouble. It's the rules." "What rules?" He pressed his lips tighter. When I leaned forward, he whispered, almost inaudible, "We can't tell. If we tell, you join the game." I frowned. "You can tell me. I won't let the others know." No answer. He hunched lower, curling into himself. It was like I was talking to someone who'd already seen too much. I tried another angle. "Noah, you're a smart kid. Games are supposed to be fun, but when you play this one, you look like you're carrying the world on your back. That's heavy, and I don't like seeing you sad." He shook his head again. "You can't help." A resignation no child should carry. For the rest of the morning, I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing at Noah while teaching fractions, watching his pencil move half-heartedly across the page, his eyes clouded with something I couldn't name. At lunch, I tried again, this time with the whole class. "So," I said casually, leaning against the edge of my desk, "that game you all like to play, the name one. What's it about?" Silence spread across the classroom like ink in water. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the kids who were usually loudest stared down at their food. "It's just a game," one muttered. "Looks a little more serious than that." No one answered. I scanned the faces, tense, every one of them avoiding my eyes. Then a girl at the back, brave or careless, spoke without looking up. "If you don't pass it on, it stays." The room went rigid. A few kids hissed at her, shushing. She stuffed a cracker into her mouth and refused to say more. I raised my eyebrows, trying to make light of it. "Pass what on?" The silence was total. I let it drop, not wanting to spook them further, but the words echoed in my mind all afternoon. "If you don't pass it on, it stays." By the final bell, my decision was made. I'd never joined their games before, never blurred the line between Mr. Hellbrook and the children. But seeing Noah like that, knowing he carried something he believed he couldn't share, it gnawed at me. If joining their game gave me an angle to help these kids, it was worth loosening up a bit. So the next day at recess, when the circle formed and the chanting began, I stepped closer. Noah's eyes widened when I knelt beside him. "Tell you what," I said softly. "How about I play this time?" The kids froze mid-step, their faces pale as snow. The circle went still. 20 children frozen in place, eyes locked to me as though I'd broken some unspoken law. "Teachers don't play," one of the girls whispered. "Why not?" I asked, keeping my tone gentle, playful. "Seems like fun. Maybe I'll be better at it than you think." Noah's lips parted, his face caught somewhere between fear and hope. For the first time all week, his shoulders seemed to ease. "You can," he murmured, "but you have to do it right." "And what's right?" I asked. His eyes flicked up to mine. "You have to say your full name." The words made the rest of the circle flinch. One boy hissed through his teeth, shaking his head. Another tugged at Noah's sleeve, urging him to stop. But Noah was insistent. "It doesn't count otherwise." I hesitated. 15 years in classrooms had taught me the power of boundaries. My first name was one of them. I was Mr. Hellbrook, always. And yet Noah was smiling now, faintly. The first real smile I'd seen from him in weeks. A fragile thing, but real. What harm could a name do? "All right," I said, lowering my voice so he could hear. "Just this once." I leaned in, whispered it, "John Hellbrook." The change was instant. The circle, which had been stiff and uncertain, erupted in motion. The children's voices rose in a sudden chant, names spilling into rhythm. They circled me, faces pale, but eyes fixed, the words tumbling over each other in a frenzy. Noah staggered back, relief breaking across his face like dawn. He let out a sharp, almost joyful laugh before clapping both hands over his mouth. The color returned to his cheeks, his eyes bright again as though the invisible weight had slipped off his shoulders. This wasn't the laughter of a shared joke. This was the laughter of release. I'd taken something from him, something he was glad to lose. By the time the bell rang, the game was over. "Thanks, Mr. Hellbrook," Noah whispered, then darted off after the others. For the rest of the afternoon, I rode that warmth. Seeing him unburdened made the unease worth it. Part 3. That night the doubts began. I was grading essays in the quiet of my apartment when I heard it first, faint, indistinct. My pen paused mid-mark. "Hellbrook." I froze, listening. "John Hellbrook." It came from the kitchen. No, not from. Through. The way a draft moved through walls, whispered as though someone leaned close behind my ear, but with no breath, no body. I stood, heart pounding, checking every room. Nothing. Locked windows, bolted door, silence. Back at the desk, the papers were scattered, deliberately rearranged. My name was written across them in faint, uneven strokes, lettered again and again by invisible hands. I gathered them quickly and shoved them into a drawer, sat in the dark, pulse hammering. From the corner of the room, just beyond where the lamplight reached, came a whisper again. "John Hellbrook." I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it repeated, patient, endless, as though something had finally learned what it needed. The whispers didn't stop. Never loud, just present. Slipping through the cracks of my apartment at night, curling under the hum of the refrigerator, murmuring from the dark corners of the bedroom. Always my full name, patient, relentless. It wasn't violent, but it made everything feel wrong. At school, it followed me, interrupting my teachings on a semi-regular basis. The kids knew when I stumbled through roll call, distracted. They exchanged looks. Whispers darted between them like sparks. "He's it now. The collector's on him." The relief in Noah's face now felt deeper than any accusation. He was light as air. That was when I understood the game wasn't cruel. It wasn't bullying. It was survival. A ritual not to entertain, but to pass on the weight before it hollowed them out. And now it was mine. By the third day, the headaches began. They weren't normal, just the constant pressure on the back of my skull, like someone pressing a hand there and never letting go. Sleep came in fragments before the whispers snapped me awake. In the classroom, I caught myself muttering, not whole sentences, just my own name over and over, lips moving soundlessly until I realized what I was doing. And every time I slipped, the room seemed to darken a fraction, as if something had leaned closer to hear. The children noticed before I admitted it to myself. At first, they were delighted. I stumbled over math drills, forgot spelling lists, let the schedule drift. My faltering control meant longer recesses, free periods, games spilling into lessons. But joy only lasts so long when it curdles against fear. By the end of the week, my hands shook when I tried to write on the board. My eyes burned, heavy with exhaustion. Once mid-sentence, I stopped cold, unable to remember what I just said. The silence stretched until one boy nervously supplied the answer himself. The laughter died. Now the whispers in the classroom weren't playful. They were anxious. I'd look up from grading and find 20 pairs of eyes watching me, wide and uncertain. Even Noah, freed from his burden, avoided my gaze. Relief lingered in his face, yes, but guilt too. He knew what I carried now. By the time Friday came, I could barely hold the chalk. I leaned against the desk, the room spinning, words stumbling from my mouth in fragments. The children sat frozen, recess balls untouched, pencils idle in their hands. When the bell rang, they filed out slowly, whispering among themselves. I sat with my head in my hands, trying not to mutter my own name out loud. That was when I noticed the folded scrap of paper tucked beneath my notebook. Small, careful handwriting in pencil. Don't keep it too long. It hurts. No signature, just the warning. By the second week, I started to consider it. The thought crept in during roll call. I read the names in order. Carter, Diaz, Huang. Each child answering here without hesitation. But what if I pushed harder? I imagined pausing over a student's name, pretending to mispronounce it, then frowning until they corrected me. Not just their first name, but the whole thing drawn out for clarity. Their full name. The game would recognize it. The collector would shift to them. The images made me sick, but they clung to me anyway. I could hand back papers insisting on formality. Read your name for me. All of it. A teacher's request. They wouldn't question it. The burden would fall just like it always did in the game. But when I glanced up, I saw their faces. Not mischievous now or playful. Concerned eyes darting to my shaking hands, my ashen skin, the way I stumbled through lessons. Their worry hit me harder than the whispers ever could. I dropped the papers, voice rough. Go on recess. They scattered too quickly, the relief obvious. And in the sudden quiet, I heard a murmur at the window, carried on no wind. A girl lingered, fiddling with her sleeve. She didn't meet my eyes when she said, "You're not supposed to keep it. It's worse if you do." Worse? How? I asked, my voice cracking. She only shook her head. We don't know. Nobody ever lasts this long. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The whispers filled every shadow, pressing against my ears, my throat, the corners of the room. For the first time, I thought of outsiders. Another teacher, a clerk at the grocery store, my sister if I called her. Anyone, someone who could take it, someone who wouldn't know how it worked. But the thought collapsed in on itself almost as soon as it formed. They didn't know the rules. They wouldn't understand the game, wouldn't know how to pass it on. What if they kept it forever? What if they broke under it? And worse, they'd know who had given it to them. I pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw sparks. My own whispering lips brushed the silence. My name again and again, unbidden. From the corner of the room, the collector stirred. I couldn't see it, not directly, but I felt it. Leaning closer, listening. I clenched my jaw against the truth. The longer I held it, the more I knew I was treading into a place no child had survived. It didn't take weeks for things to get worse, just days. The headaches deepened into nausea, my hands trembling so badly, I had to steady the chalk with both. The kids stopped laughing at my mistakes. Their eyes followed me now with a kind of fearful pity. And then I began to see it. At first, only in the corners of my vision, something pale and bent, watching from the far end of the hall. Each time I turned, it was gone. A trick of exhaustion, I told myself. But by Thursday, it no longer waited in the periphery. In the middle of a spelling exercise, I glanced at the back of the classroom and froze. It was standing between the last row of desks. Too tall, its shoulders brushing the ceiling, a body too thin for its height, limbs bent at angles that suggested too many joints. Where a face should have been was only a hollow, black and glistening, as if something had hollowed it out from within. The worst part wasn't the sight. The worst part was that the children didn't react. Their pencils scratched quietly on the page as if nothing loomed above them. as if I was the only one who could see it. My throat closed. A sound tried to climb out. My name whispered against my will, but I bit down so hard my teeth rattled. The figure tilted its head. The void where its face should have been rippling, stretching. I staggered against the desk. "Mr. Hellbrook?" one of the girls asked, voice tiny. The room had gone silent, 20 pencils stilled mid-word. 20 faces turned toward me, wide-eyed and afraid. In that terrifying silence, the figure remained. It was the collector. It had followed the memory of the name and now the sight of its own manifestation. Its presence was the invisible weight the children had felt, made hideously visible only to the one who currently bore the burden. I thought, better me than them, because if I can pass it on, if one of these children slipped and saw what I had just seen, it would carve them hollow. It would break them. I couldn't do that. Not to them. My vision blurred. The classroom tilted. The whispering faded just enough for me to steady myself. I clutched the edge of the desk until my knuckles whitened. The children didn't move. They knew what was happening and they knew I hadn't passed it on. No one spoke as I gathered the chalk again, my hand shaking so hard the word I wrote was illegible. And then, in the middle of the next sentence, everything went black. Just for a breath, a blink, but long enough that when I opened my eyes, 20 children were staring at me in perfect silence. They knew I was breaking. The classroom emptied in a rush of coats and backpacks, the chatter fading down the hall. I stayed at my desk, staring at the blank board, the chalk still trembling in my hand. My body felt like wet paper, thin, tearing under its own weight. I almost didn't notice her. A quiet girl, small for her age, stood by the doorway, twisting the strap of her bag. When I looked up, she met my eyes with a steadiness that startled me. Not fear or mischief. Something older. "You can't hold it forever," she said softly. The words froze me in place. Before I could respond, she stepped into the room. "Play with me." My stomach dropped. "No." My voice cracked harsher than I intended. "Absolutely not." But she didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. "You'll break. You already are. It's not supposed to stay with one person this long." I shook my head. "You don't know what it's like." Her voice didn't waver. "I know enough. We all do." The silence between us stretched. I thought of Noah's relief. The way his shoulders had lifted the instant I joined the game. I thought of the notes slipped under my papers. "Don't keep it too long. It hurts." And I knew she was right. Still, the thought of handing that weight back to a child tore at me. I grabbed the edge of the desk, fighting the words. "You're just a kid." She gave a small, almost sad smile. "So are all of us." We didn't gather the whole class, just the two of us. A small circle in the quiet of the empty room. She stood across from me, hands clasped in front of her, eyes calm. I tried to stall, to explain, to beg her not to do it, but she only shook her head. "This is how it works. You know it. We all do." The chant began. I stumbled through it, my voice broken. She answered as the children always did, steady, unafraid. And then she slipped deliberately. She said her own name aloud, clear and sharp, eyes never leaving mine. The moment the word left her mouth, I felt it. The weight vanished. The pressure in my skull, the whispers in the corners, the sick dread that clung to me like damp clothes. Gone. Just gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt light, clear, alive. My breath came free and easy. My hands stilled, the silence in the room was clean. She smiled faintly, but sadness never leaving her face. "See better." My throat closed. "You shouldn't have." "It's okay," she interrupted. Her voice was calm, certain. "We all take turns." Before I could answer, the rest of the class had gathered in the doorway, drawn back by instinct. They didn't cheer or laugh. They simply surrounded her, solemn, quiet, their eyes filled with understanding that ran far too deep for children their age. I looked at her again. Her shoulders had slumped. The same weight I'd carried was settling onto her. I could see it in the way her smile trembled, in the faint glassiness creeping into her eyes. The collector was with her now. I didn't hear it, but I knew. The guilt hit me like a wave. I wanted to take it back, to hold it forever if it meant she wouldn't have to see what I had seen. But she only stood a little straighter, nodded once, and whispered, "It's lighter now for everyone." By the following week, the rhythm of the schoolyard had returned. From my classroom window, I watched them form their circle, feet crunching in the gravel, voices rising in their strange chant. The names slipped, laughter flared, and the burden shifted. The game carried on as it always had. But I understood now. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bullying. It was survival. The collector was too heavy for one child to bear forever. Passing it on wasn't meanness, but mercy. They had all learned the rules. Never hold on too long to never let it root too deeply. I walked among them during recess. They scattered around me, playing foursquare, trading cards, skipping rope. But always in one corner of the yard, the circle formed. Always the chant rose. And sometimes I saw it go wrong. A child held it too long. Their eyes dulled. Their shoulders drooped. They slipped in lessons, grew withdrawn. The others pressed in, circling faster, trying to make the exchange happen. But the child resisted, clung to it out of fear or confusion. That was when I stepped in. Their voices rose, overlapping, tricking, teasing. And I let myself falter. I let the words slip. My own name on my tongue, clear and deliberate. The chant snapped shut around me. The air seemed to shift, heavy and sharp. I felt the weight settle back on my shoulders like a familiar cloak. The children watched and they moved on. As the circle broke apart, I stayed behind, shoulders bowed beneath an invisible weight. While the whispers returned, my name repeated in the hush between heartbeats, settling into me once more. And for the first time I welcomed it. The collector was mine again. The headache was back, a constant low-frequency hum behind my eyes, and the shadows in my apartment felt thicker. But now it wasn't just a burden, it was a tool. My students were safe, at least until the weight became unbearable again. I had become the self-appointed keeper of the burden, the one adult who understood the terrible, necessary logic of the game. The whispers, endless repetition of John Hellbrook, no longer drove me to panic. I listened to them, cataloging their rhythm. They were the sound of the collector attempting to root itself, to anchor its non-existence in my tangible life. The visible manifestation, the tall, hollow, bent figure, never appeared when I was alone in my apartment. It only appeared in the classroom, between the last row of desks, always in the presence of the children. It was watching me watch them, enforcing the rules of the transference. I learned the signs of a child holding the burden too long. The small girl who had saved me, Sarah, I later learned her name was Sarah, carried it for 4 days. By the 4th day, her movements were sluggish, her handwriting fractured, and she cried silently while working on a simple math problem. That afternoon, I called recess early. I sent the class out but kept Sarah back. She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with tears and the glassy resignation of the burden. "It's too heavy, isn't it, Sarah?" I asked, my voice soft. She only shook her head, unable to speak. The collector had stolen her ability to articulate the pain. "You have to pass it on," I urged. "It will break you." She finally managed a whisper, her voice thin. "I don't want them to see what I see." The collector had begun to show her its true form. It wasn't the children's pity she feared. It was the psychological damage the manifestation caused. I made a choice. I stepped into the hallway, leaving the classroom door slightly ajar. I walked until I was standing next to the principal's office, a bustling area full of secretaries and ringing phones. I felt the collector's presence shift with me, a heavy, cold shadow. I paused, took a breath, and deliberately spoke the trigger. "John Hellbrook." The air in the hallway snapped. The secretary stopped typing. The phones went silent. Everyone froze. The collector, pulled by the energy of the full name, latched onto the nearest available consciousness. A new, unsuspecting adult. I felt the weight leave me instantly. The pressure behind my eyes vanished. I quickly walked back to my classroom, found Sarah, and pulled her into the chaos of the resumed hallway activity. I had given the burden to the principal's office, knowing the high traffic and adult complexity would immediately force a transfer or dissipation. I couldn't risk the children. The act was selfish but necessary. I had violated the ritual by giving the burden to an outsider, but I had saved a child. The fallout from the principal's office incident was immediate and bizarrely localized. The atmosphere of the school changed. The secretary, a kind woman named Mrs. Davies, came down with a sudden, severe case of vertigo and took the rest of the week off. The principal, Mr. Thompson, started obsessively locking and unlocking his office door. The burden had passed, but it left behind a temporary residue of anxiety and confusion. The children watched me with new eyes, a mixture of awe and profound gratitude. I had confirmed their terrifying reality by performing an unauthorized transfer. I was no longer just Mr. Hellbrook, the teacher. I was the one adult who was in the game but not of the game. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. The accidental transfers were too risky. I had to understand the collector's rules beyond what the children knew. I started researching the area's history. This small, isolated district was built on old mining territory. I found references in dusty local archives to an old folk practice called the naming of the void. It was a ritual used by settlers to contain malignant spirits tied to the underground, a method of placation through identity. The concept was simple. To contain an unbound entity, you give it the ultimate currency, a full, complete name. The name acts as a temporary vessel. The entity focuses on possessing the name, not the person or the location, until the name is spoken aloud again, transferring the burden. The children's game was a bastardized, generational survival ritual. The key flaw: the longer the name is held, the more fully the collector manifests, increasing the difficulty of the transfer. I realized the danger I was in. I, John Hellbrook, was an adult, strong enough to hold the collector for weeks, but the payoff was lethal. The longer I held it, the more fully it saw the world, the more powerful its final grasp would be. The children had survived because they played hot potato with the burden. I was trying to hold a cannonball. I devised a new strategy: controlled microtransfers. I began studying my students, looking for those who were strong enough to carry the burden for a single school day without breaking, but complex enough to satisfy the collector's anchor. I needed children who had deep focus, resilience, and paradoxically, a willingness to follow the rules of the game. My first choice was a boy named Marcus, a quiet, intense student who excelled in chess. The next day during recess I joined the circle. The children watched, their faces pale, knowing what was coming. I circled Marcus, my voice clear and deliberate. I tricked him, using a clever historical question related to his favorite subject, forcing him to state his full name to defend his answer. The burden shifted. I felt the weight lift instantly, the headache receding. Marcus froze for a second, his eyes widening. But he quickly recovered, understanding the urgency of the moment. He was it now, and he knew he had to play to survive. The controlled microtransfers worked. I had become the architect of the game, managing the collector's presence like a lethal virus. I would take the burden on Friday afternoon, hold it over the weekend while the school was empty, and then pass it on to a selected student by Monday afternoon. The weekends were terrifying. The collector, anchored to my full name, used the isolation to its advantage. My apartment was a constant theater of psychological warfare. The whispers were aggressive now, no longer hesitant. They didn't just repeat my name. They recited personal memories, vulnerabilities, and insecurities, aiming for the psychological fracture that would give the visible manifestation permission to appear outside the classroom. I started seeing the collector's work everywhere. The books on my shelves were rearranged to spell out my name in code. The water in the sink would pool in the shape of the hollow, stretched void I had seen in the classroom. But I fought back with the knowledge the children didn't possess. I learned that the collector's manifestation was triggered by intense, focused fear coupled with self-pity. It required the host to be emotionally compromised and acknowledge their own despair. So, I maintained rigid emotional control. I meditated. I cleaned my apartment meticulously, destroying any chaos that might allow the collector to anchor a physical presence. I never allowed myself to feel sad, only tired or angry. Anger is a shield. One Sunday night, the collector escalated. I was sitting at my kitchen table when the air pressure dropped, and the temperature plummeted. The whispering coalesced into a single, unified voice, chillingly calm. "You cannot keep me from the children. I am hunger. You are merely the next vessel." Then the lights in the kitchen snapped off. I was plunged into darkness. I felt the shift. The manifestation was near. I heard the dry, scraping sound of its movement from the hallway. I didn't panic. I slammed my fist onto the table. "You have no power here," I roared, naming its origin. "You are bound by the soil. You are the naming of the void. You only exist in the space we give you." The scraping stopped. The pressure eased and the lights flickered back on. I was alone. I had temporarily broken the connection by violating the unspoken rule of the ritual, acknowledging its true, ancient nature. But I was weakening. The headaches were constant. I was running out of strong students to carry the weight. My rotation was getting dangerously short. I realized I needed a permanent solution, a way to end the game without killing the children. I needed to find the original source of the game. I cornered Sarah, the little girl who had first saved me during lunch duty. She was resilient, having carried the burden twice, and she was loyal to the rules. "Sarah," I whispered, pulling her close. "You know how this started. Who was the first it?" She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. "We can't tell, Mr. Hellbrook. If we tell, you join the game." "I am the game, Sarah. I'm the one keeping it from you. Now listen. You know the name of the teacher before me? The one who quit?" She nodded. "Mrs. Albright. I need to know if she was it. Was she the one who brought the game here?" "No," Sarah murmured, checking over her shoulder. "She learned it from the teacher before her. Mr. Vance. He was the one who was here a long, long time. That name Vance was a lead. I spent the next night using the school's old unsecured archive computer, tracing the faculty history back decades. Mr. Vance had taught here for 22 years before retiring abruptly in 1982. His departure was marked by a bizarre, unconfirmed incident involving a prolonged absence and unusual psychological distress. I found his retirement address, a secluded cabin 30 miles north of the school, nestled deep in the old mining territory. The origin of the ritual, the naming of the void, was tied to this region. Mr. Vance wasn't just a teacher. He was the last known permanent custodian of the game. I called the number. An old, tired voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Vance? My name is John Helbrook. I'm the new teacher at your old district." A long silence stretched across the line. Then the voice, now thin and brittle, asked, "Did you say your name?" "No," I lied instantly. "I'm Mr. Helbrook. I need to talk to you about the game." The silence returned, but this time it was different, not empty but cautious. "You know the rules then?" "I know the rules of transference. I know the collector exists. I know I'm holding the burden. And I know I need to end it. I need to know the counter-ritual." Mr. Vance's voice was a low, heavy sigh. "You're the first adult to ask. They all run or they break. You're holding it too long, son. It'll show you its truth soon enough. I've seen its form. I've heard its voice. I need the name of the binding ritual. The original one." He gave in. "The game doesn't end. It's too old. But you can lock it. You can bury the name. The ritual requires the collector to be fully manifested at the source point." "Where is the source point?" "The old schoolhouse. The original building. It was leveled, but the foundation is still there. It's built right over the deepest vein, the oldest void. That's where it first anchored." He then gave me the rules of the binding ritual, a horrifying final set of instructions that demanded an impossible sacrifice. The rules of the binding ritual were simple and terrifying. It wasn't about transferring the burden, but about permanent isolation. The binding ritual, rules of final containment. The vessel, the collector must be fully anchored to an adult host, a complete name must be known. The source, the host must bring the collector to the oldest point of original anchor, the old school foundation. The sacrifice, the host must willingly and consciously speak the collector's true name aloud at the source. The true name is not the human name, John Helbrook, but the name of the void, the ultimate mathematical expression it uses to communicate. The consequence, speaking the true name doesn't transfer the burden, it locks the host and the collector together inside the original source point forever, sealing the void. Mr. Vance finished, his voice trembling. "It doesn't end the burden, John. It just makes the burden permanent and keeps it out of the world. You become the wall." I felt the blood drain from my face. I had sought a way to end the game, and I had found a way to become the final living piece of its containment. "I can't ask the children to play anymore," I stated, the decision hardening in my voice. "It's my turn. I'll take it." The next day was a Tuesday. I kept the burden, enduring the constant, focused psychological assault. I felt the physical manifestation of the collector, the hollow, bent figure, looming constantly at the edges of my vision. It was testing my resolve, trying to force me into the final despair that would make the transfer easy. At 3 p.m., I sent the children home, telling them I had urgent work to do. As the last bus pulled away, I took my shovel and a small camping lantern and drove 20 minutes north to the location of the old schoolhouse. The foundation was a cracked square of concrete hidden beneath decades of forest growth. The air here was profoundly cold, sterile, and silent. I was standing on the ultimate source point. I walked to the center of the square and began to dig. The earth was soft, then hit hard, ancient rock, the mouth of the deepest vein. The deeper I dug, the louder the whispers became, not in my ears but in the air itself. They were excited, anticipatory, knowing the ritual was about to commence. I dug down 6 feet until the pit was a narrow, dark cylinder. I could feel the cold rising from the earth, and with it, the intense, pure mathematical language I had heard in my dreams. I climbed out of the pit, leaving the shovel and lantern beside the edge. I was ready. I didn't hear the collector approach. I only felt the air snap behind me, thick and heavy. I turned slowly. The tall, bent figure was standing on the edge of the pit, completely visible now, even in the fading sunlight. It was black, glistening, and perfectly symmetrical. The void that should have been its face rippled, stretching in anticipation. I raised my chin. I had the collector fully manifested and anchored at the source. Now for the final sacrifice. I took a deep breath and I opened my mouth. I didn't speak the human name. I didn't whisper a secret. I spoke the collector's true name, the language of the void, the specific prime number sequence that formed its identity and its signal. The moment the numbers left my tongue, the world dissolved. The ground beneath me shuddered. The trees seemed to lean away, horrified. The air pressure dropped so violently I felt my lungs collapse. The collector let out a sound, a shriek of pure, eternal static that was both triumph and agony. The force was unimaginable, pulling everything toward the pit. The collector's shimmering body was violently pulled backward, dissolving and collapsing into the pit. It was fighting, but the ritual was absolute. It was being pulled back into its original anchor point. I felt the simultaneous pull. The words of the true name were a binding chain, locking my consciousness to the entity. I stumbled forward, my arms flailing, pulled by an invisible, crushing force toward the dark mouth of the pit. My human body was the final piece of the lock. I fought it, grabbing the shovel I had left behind, digging the metal into the earth to stop my inevitable descent. I was pulled to the very edge, dirt raining down on my face as I clung to the shovel's handle. Then I felt a new force, a different pull. The ground beneath me was shaking, but it wasn't the collector. It was the frantic crunch of gravel and the scream of children's voices. The entire class, Noah, Sarah, Marcus, all of them, were standing at the edge of the forest. They had followed me, sensing the desperate finality of the game. They were shouting, not in panic, but in rhythm, their voices rising in a single, focused chant. The name game. The chant hit the source point like a counter-signal. The collector's pull faltered. The binding ritual, designed to be performed in isolation, was being interrupted by the community that had survived it for generations. The children were trying to transfer the burden one last time. The weight left me instantly. The pressure snapped away. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping, looking down into the pit. The collector was gone. The true name was silenced. The source was sealed. I looked at the children. They were silent now, their faces pale, watching me. They hadn't saved me from the collector. They had saved me from the binding ritual. They had saved me from becoming the wall. I lay on the cold earth, breathing. The pit was still silent. The collector was gone, not destroyed, but simply locked away inside its original source point, its ritual interrupted by the collective will of the children. I had failed the binding ritual, but I had succeeded in my primary mission, to end the game. The weight was gone. The terror was gone. The silence was clean. The children walked toward me, their footsteps soft in the dirt. They were no longer playing. They were a community of survivors. "You shouldn't have," Sarah whispered, her voice fragile. "You broke the rules," Noah added, his eyes wide. "The rules were wrong," I said, my voice thick with exhaustion. "The rules demanded a permanent sacrifice. We found a better way." I explained it to them. The collector was gone, but the name, my name, John Hellbrook, was still known. The burden, the memory of the game still existed. We couldn't erase it, but we could redefine it. The game was no longer about survival. It was about containment. I taught them the final, necessary rule of the game. Never initiate the chant unless the burden is visibly harming someone. The ritual was now a defensive mechanism, a fire extinguisher, not a mandatory exchange. The children returned to school the next day. The playground was noisy again, filled with the usual screams and laughter. The circles still formed sometimes, but they were spontaneous, brief, and always rooted in genuine concern. I had changed the rules, and the new rules allowed them to be children again. But the collector was still there. I knew it. It was trapped beneath the old schoolhouse foundation, bound by the interrupted ritual and the collective forgetfulness of the community. My role, however, had changed once more. I was no longer the keeper of the burden. I was the custodian of the true name. My life settled into a new, quiet routine. I continued teaching, but now my lessons had a different focus. I taught the children history, not just of dates and wars, but of local knowledge, the power of collective action, and the importance of silence. I taught them how to be resilient, not by carrying a weight, but by understanding it. The collector, bound beneath the earth, was still trying to communicate. I would feel its presence sometimes, a faint pressure behind my eyes, a single sharp word whispered into the quiet of my apartment. It was attempting to rebuild its anchor, to find a crack in the foundation. I fought back with my own ritual, the ritual of the unclaimed name. Every night, I would sit at my kitchen table and write the collector's true name, that elegant, complex mathematical sequence, on a sheet of paper. But I wouldn't stop there. I would write it, and then I would immediately burn the paper, scattering the ashes to the wind. It was an act of controlled destruction, acknowledging the collector's existence but refusing it a permanent vessel or memory. I was deliberately injecting chaos and impermanence into its structured world. The burden never rooted again. The collector was denied the stability it required. It would attempt to manifest and I would feel the pressure, the hollow silence, but it was fleeting. The unclaimed name ritual was working. The children were thriving. Sarah's handwriting was steady again. Noah was raising his hand in class. The laughter was genuine, unburdened. The only thing they carried was the knowledge of the rules and the willingness to intervene if necessary. But the war was not over. It was a cold war, a stalemate. The true danger arrived not from the collector, but from the outside. One morning, the principal called me into his office. Mr. Thompson, fully recovered from his sudden vertigo, was nervous. "Mr. Hellbrook," he began, his voice low, "we've had a property dispute. The old schoolhouse foundation. Some corporation from out of state wants to buy the land." My blood ran cold. The corporation planned to excavate the foundation and build a small community center. They were going to dig right into the source point. I looked at the plans. They were going to destroy the ancient containment system. The binding ritual would be undone. The collector would be unleashed, unbound and angry, not just at one school but at the entire world. I knew I couldn't tell them the truth. They would never believe me. I had to stop the excavation. I called Mr. Vance. His voice was thin and shaky, but filled with a sudden, terrible clarity. "The foundation is the lock, John. If they break the lock, the true name won't hold. The only thing that can contain it now is physical pressure." I drove to the site of the old schoolhouse. It was surrounded by construction tape. I sat there all night, staring at the concrete square, feeling the familiar heavy pulse of the collector beneath the earth. I knew what was coming. It was preparing. I realized the ultimate irony. The corporation was going to accidentally perform the final transfer. When the foundation broke, the burden would fall on the nearest large, conscious entity. The entire construction crew and then the town would be infected by the game. I called the children. I couldn't risk them being near the source. I told them there was a special, mandatory field trip to a location far outside the district. I had to use my authority one last time, not to hide a burden, but to protect them from a catastrophe. The next morning, the construction crews arrived. Bulldozers, backhoes, and a team of surveyors began marking the old foundation. I stood on the periphery watching, my heart pounding. I had to get to the center of the foundation before they did. I knew the true name. I had the knowledge. I had the commitment. I had to put myself directly over the source, to act as the final temporary barrier. I slipped past the perimeter tape, running to the center of the cracked concrete square. I stood there, drawing a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable pull. A loud, grating sound filled the air as the bulldozer hit the first edge of the foundation. The ground vibrated. The silence snapped. The collector roared, not a sound but a psychic wave of eternal agony and triumph. The burden was free. I felt the pull instantly, a crushing vacuum locking onto my mind, demanding a vessel. I raised my hands. I was ready to speak the true name again, ready to lock myself and the collector beneath the earth forever, completing the sacrifice Mr. Vance had attempted. But I was stopped by a smaller, sharper noise. The construction crew, annoyed by the structural resistance, had attached a massive jackhammer to the concrete. The rhythmic, violent pounding of the jackhammer was not music. It was chaotic, loud, and utterly unstructured. The chaos was anathema to the collector. The entity, just freed and attempting to anchor itself, was immediately confronted with overwhelming random noise. The binding ritual had failed, but the principle of unstructured chaos was effective. The collector needed stillness and silence to establish its pattern. The jackhammer's relentless, unpredictable pounding shattered its focus. The pressure lifted. The pull stopped. The collector, unable to sustain its full manifestation, receded instantly back into the depths of the ore vein, seeking silence. I walked out of the site, past the confused construction workers, past the roaring noise of the jackhammer. I had won not by sacrifice but by noise pollution. I returned to my students. The binding ritual was unnecessary. The name game was obsolete. The true name was unnecessary. My final lesson was simple. The greatest weapon against an ancient, silent evil is not courage, but relentless, everyday noise. I continued teaching. I moved back to the city, taking a job in a massive, noisy high school. I teach my students the history of the unstructured chaos, and I encourage them to be loud, chaotic, and messy. And every year, on the anniversary of the excavation, I call Mr. Vance. I don't ask him how he is. I just hold the phone up to the roar of a busy city intersection, letting the chaos travel across the line. The collector is still there, beneath the old schoolhouse foundation, waiting. But as long as the noise continues, it will never find the silence it needs to speak its name again.